Hi, my name is Kira. I tend to forget to introduce myself, so this is what that is. I am a Seattle-based storyteller, writer, podcaster, you name it. I just really want to share the gospel and share how Jesus truly changes everything. So this is your invitation to stay. You can find other episodes as well as my blog, any other important links, all in the description. Also, you can check it out on Gauthier.com. That should have everything that you're looking for, but there is grace here, there is love here, there is truth here. I hope you enjoy today's episode. How can we be so sure that the New Testament is reliable? The two major questions are, do we have accurate copies of the original documents written in the first century? And are these documents true? I touched on this a little in the last episode, but I want to do more of a deep dive on this today. As with you, my Christian friend, you are called to stand up for your beliefs and be ready for the questions that may come your way. Do you know how to answer this? And if not, do you know how to research this? Hey, my friend who doesn't know Jesus, hi, thanks for tuning in. Feel free to grab your coffee as we look into the common questions and misconceptions regarding the Bible. Specifically, the New Testament, as that is the portion that talks about Jesus. I think you and I may be able to relate. I come from a Christian family, but a few years ago I really started to question if we can trust the Bible. This then began my research looking into the existing evidence that exists and what most accurately explains reality. The most important question may be, who do you say this Jesus is? Either the Christian worldview is true or it isn't. And if it's true, that means everything. That changes everything. What on earth do we know about the New Testament? Many are quick to believe, including Christians, that the Bible we have today came through the game of telephone, which I think we've all played at some point as kids. One kid would whisper a message to another, who would then whisper to another, and before you know it, the original message is completely distorted. That's why many believe that the Bible can't be trusted. I wouldn't trust the Bible either if that's how it happened. But it didn't. It wasn't like the game of telephone. The New Testament was transmitted through writing, which is very different from oral communication. It began with one letter that was copied multiple times, and those copies were copied multiple times. It was more geometric than the telephone game. It was not this singular line of transmission. These copies are referred to as manuscripts. With the New Testament, we have more than 5,800 copies in Greek alone. And each copy consists of 2.5 million pages of text. Those are just the ones in Greek. We have more than 10,000 Latin manuscript copies, along with 5,000 manuscripts in other languages. For comparison, Homer's Iliad has 1,757 manuscripts, and Plato has 210. Wait a second, Kira. I thought you mentioned different numbers in the previous episode. You are completely right. That was my bad. The numbers I mentioned in the last episode were not as up to date as I thought. And as I began researching the manuscripts again, I found newer numbers. So I'm sorry about that. Either way, the New Testament has many more copies than any other text. And that's quite impressive. But let's backtrack a little bit. When historians look at important literature from the ancient world, The way it is reconstructed is by comparing the surviving manuscripts. So it helps to have a large number of manuscripts, and ones that are not too far along after the original. More manuscripts and earlier manuscripts usually provide more trustworthy testimony, and a more accurate reconstruction will take place. This is what we call the bibliographical test. It looks at the number of copies, the time interval between the original and existing copies, and lastly, the degree of accuracy. I remind us that when we talk about the New Testament, we are referring to 27 separate documents. To say that we have more manuscripts than any other book is quite notable. When we talk about the amount of time between the earliest manuscript copy and the original, the earliest is best, right? Because it reduces the chance of changes or errors. And that makes sense. So when we look at the New Testament, there are a few numbers to notice. Between 25 to 50 years after the original, we have about 114 fragments of the New Testament. Within 100 years after the original, we have 200 completed books. Because, like what we talked about earlier, the Bible contains 66 books, and 27 of those are the New Testament. Within 150 years, we have 250 copies of the New Testament, of all 27 separate books, separate documents. And within 225 years, we have 325 complete copies of the entire Bible. Those numbers are quite impressive. Again, for comparison, the earliest manuscript for Plato was 1,300 years after the original. The earliest manuscript for Homer's Iliad was 400 years after the original. The New Testament, which contains the life of Jesus, blows everything out of the water at this point. It's quite reliable. But are there errors? Dr. Bart Ehrman is one of those names that are famous to Christians, but for the wrong reason. He has successfully, yet unfortunately, led so many Christians to atheism because he is incredibly persuasive, and he knows it. He has his own agenda, but regardless of that, what are his claims? And are they properly supported? Like, that's what actually matters. Do his claims make sense? Are they supported? Do we have evidence for what he says? In his famous book, Misquoting Jesus, he says this: "What good is it to say that the autographs, i.e. the originals, were inspired? We don't have the originals. We only have error-ridden copies, and the vast majority of these are centuries removed from the originals, and different from them, evidently in thousands of ways. There are more variations among our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament." Uh-oh. Listen, he's right. But there is something he is purposefully not telling you. There are 130,000 words in the New Testament, and when we look at these surviving handwritten manuscript copies, there are around 300,000 individual variations of that text. It's due to spelling and punctuation. When you look at the side-by-side comparison between like two main text families, majority text versus modern critical text, you'll see agreement 98% of the time. When you factor all of that in, it indicates that the New Testament is 99.5% textually pure. That comes out to roughly 400 words that are in doubt, yet none of it affects Christian doctrine. Like, of course there are differences within these manuscripts. Of course. But you must admit, 99.5% pure is is quite impressive. In the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, the authors ask this question and answer it in this way. How do the New Testament documents fare in this regard? It's better than anything else from the ancient world. The New Testament documents have more manuscripts, earlier manuscripts, and more abundantly supported manuscripts than the best 10 pieces of classical literature combined. From this point, I think we can assume that the manuscripts are accurate. But what good does this serve if we so happen to have accurate copies of a lie? Moving on to our next question, does the New Testament accurately line up with history? This is really what matters. How do we know that the Book of Mormon is accurate? How do we know if the Quran is accurate? How do we know if the Bible is accurate? With these so-called historical books, we judge them by the internal evidence test and the external evidence test. Like, we judge them against the facts. We judge them against what we know. We judge them against what we've discovered. I've gone over this in the past, but I think for the sake of time, we will only look at the external evidence test for this specific episode. The internal evidence test is more forensics based. Christians say inspired men wrote the Bible, but what is one of these? How can we test this? Well, you study the eyewitness accounts. Do they tell the same story? Do they contradict one another? Do they have motive to lie? Do they have motive to start a new religion for the heck of it? Those are the kinds of questions you investigate. The external evidence test examines the accuracy of the history reported in the New Testament. It asks if evidence outside the document in question agrees with the text. Specifically, was there really a Jewish man nearly 2,000 years ago by the name of Jesus who taught profound truths, performed miracles, and was crucified by Roman and Jewish authorities for claiming to be God, and who appeared to many witnesses after rising from the dead 3 days later? That is the question. As we look at the New Testament, most scholars look at the eyewitness accounts to examine if what they wrote was the truth, because they claim that it's their testimony. Luke, the author of the Gospel of Luke and then the book of Acts, is an easy target because of the specificity he includes when he writes about local places, names, environmental conditions, customs of the culture, and different events. Like, he names such things as the specific Corinthian synagogue, the particular flight of steps used by guards, the best shipping lanes at the time, well-known shrines and images of Artemis, the proper term for those holding court. Historian Colin Hemer identifies 84 facts in the last 16 chapters of Acts, which have been confirmed by historical and archaeological research. That's just the last 16 chapters, keep in mind. That's mind-boggling. I think we lose sight of how significant this is because we forget that Luke did not have access to like modern day maps, charts, or information. Luke has been described as a first-rate historian for his attention to detail and accurate reporting. In the Gospel of John, we also see an impressive number for historically confirmed details. For example, archaeology confirms the use of stone water jars that he mentioned. Same goes for the proper place of Jacob's well. The same goes for the proper location and description of the pool of Bethesda. The same goes for the pool of Siloam. He mentions ceremonial cleansing, and that was a common practice prior to the Passover. He mentions anointing guests' feet with oil, also part of Jewish culture. Same with foot washing. Like, the things he wrote about, it fits the culture at the time. It makes sense. Just by looking at a few of the New Testament documents, John, Luke, and about half of the book of Acts, we find that there's 140 plus details that appear to be authentic and historically confirmed. Furthermore, in the late 19th century, Sir William Ramsay set out to prove that the Bible was a fairy tale. After 30 years of in-depth archaeology in Asia Minor and the Middle East, he converted to Christianity based on his findings. No archaeological evidence has ever refuted the Bible, and in fact, thousands of finds support the Bible. What are we to make of this? Maybe your doubts are within the eyewitnesses. You think that they got together and schemed. Maybe your doubts lie within the resurrection itself. Maybe your objection to Christianity is that you believe Jesus never claimed to be God. I've at least touched on these topics in previous episodes, so I encourage you to start there. Start there and see where the research leads you. I believe the Christian worldview accurately explains reality. I'll spoil the ending for you. Whatever you believe, even if it's purely science or atheism, you're going to have to take a leap of faith at some point. The question is, which worldview leads to the most accurate and reasonable explanation for reality? Listen, even if you still don't trust the New Testament text, let's eliminate the Bible completely. All right, let's eliminate every biblical manuscript. Then what? I'm okay with that, as long as you understand that even so, the New Testament was quoted around 36,289 times. All but 11 verses of the New Testament can be reconstructed from these quotations alone. But maybe you're still stubborn. I was. I wanted to know the story of Jesus without the Bible because I had this assumption that if something is biased, then it's filled with lies, and that's a logical fallacy for another day. Even so, there are several non-Christian sources that mention Jesus. Some of these individuals include Josephus or Tiberius. Others you can boldly claim that they're not just non-Christian sources, but rather anti-Christian sources, such as Tacitus or Celsus. Around 10 known non-Christian sources mention Jesus within 150 years of his life. In contrast, there are 9 non-Christian sources that mention Tiberius Caesar within 150 years, which is actually quite interesting because Caesar was the Roman emperor at the time. That's gotta say something about Jesus and the influence that Jesus had. When you look at the secular writers alone, this is the story you get. Jesus lived during the time of Tiberius Caesar. He lived a virtuous life. He was a wonder worker. He had a brother named James. He claimed to be the Messiah. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. An eclipse and an earthquake occurred when he died. He was crucified on the eve of the Jewish Passover. His disciples believed that he rose from the dead. His disciples were willing to die for their beliefs. Christianity spread rapidly as far as Rome. His disciples denied the Roman gods and worshiped Jesus as God. These non-Christian and anti-Christian sources perfectly line up with the New Testament. Who do you say this Jesus is? Either the Christian worldview is true or it isn't. And if it's true, that means everything. That means Jesus really did come to save those who believe in him. Maybe you're thinking, okay, well, hold on a second, Kira. those secular writers' accounts, they don't say that Jesus is God. They say that he claimed to be God. They say that the disciples worship Jesus as God. They didn't actually say that Jesus is Lord. And you're right. Because if they did claim that Jesus was God, then they'd be Christians, and therefore their quotes would get roped into the Christian sources group. You can't have it both ways. We didn't even get to touch on the number of researchers and historians that set out to disprove the Bible, but found that there's actually an overwhelming amount of evidence that supports the Bible. And then they claimed Jesus as Lord and converted to Christianity. There's an aspect to evidential Christian apologetics that I don't like. To my stubborn listener, no matter what you see, you're always going to want more evidence. And you know this. Like, think about the whole pandemic madness. No matter what you've read and what you've shared on Facebook or on Instagram, for whatever reason, there's still a handful of people that seem to be on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Even when you show them more, they always want more evidence. I think that just speaks to our human nature. We always want more. From all the research I've done, we have more than enough evidence that supports Christianity. That is what I believe. That is what I have found from looking at this stuff. I think I mentioned it in the last episode, or maybe a couple before that, but I probably spend around 10 hours a week looking at this stuff, looking at the research. I have found an overwhelming amount of evidence that supports Christianity. There really was a man who did not just claim to be God, but revealed to be God by the profound truths, performed miracles, and by the accomplished resurrection. So I just end this by inviting you to see the Christian worldview. Jesus really did come to save, and it's not based on how much you donate or how nice of a person people would describe you to be, or by any of your works or good deeds. It's just based on your belief. It's based on your belief that Christianity is true, that Jesus is Lord as he proclaimed to be. That's it, man. You believe in that and you're saved. Jesus really is just that good. I invite you to see what it looks like to claim Jesus as Lord. Jesus offers hope. Jesus offers certainty. Jesus offers identity. It seems to be countercultural at times, but it works. I've lived in a way that honors the values of today's culture, and I've lived in a way that honors the values of the Bible. The gospel just seems to work. And I just ask, would you be willing to try out my worldview? I've tried yours. Would you be willing to try out mine? Jesus changed my life, and he can change yours too. Consider it. I'm like so caffeinated. This is like 20 ounces of a cold brew. And this is not my first coffee today. Oops.